Second shot, we're here. Golden Black Live. Brian Newbert, Kyle Charters, along with, point at myself, Alan Karpick. The final show of the year. I know that breaks everybody's heart. It breaks our heart because we won't be back for until it'll be about August the 29th, I believe, will be our next show as Boilermakers will be opening up the football season against Western Michigan. Guys, believe it or not, they've been asking us kind of in the back, what are we going to talk about today? There's always a lot to talk about it in Purdue athletics, and obviously Brian Newbert, Kyle Charters will have that to hit. I want to thank also our sponsors, Basham Rentals, trusted for 3 generations to provide quality housing at Purdue, and they're in the middle of doing that right now. State Farm agent Trent Johnson, trentismyagent.com. Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow is a big day, State HDI tonight. And thanks to Christy Kuntz for her long-term sponsorship of this program. And our good friends at Triple X, on the hill but on the level, a Purdue tradition since 1929. Brian, I don't know what I segue into other Purdue traditions, but it's always an interesting April when it comes down to coaching. And I know there's been on the boards today a little bit about Matt Painter in Missouri, but maybe that's been put to rest now with the coaching change there. And of course, Purdue fans know that Matt Painter was a candidate a couple of years ago at Missouri before deciding to stay at Purdue. What's the latest?
If you haven't heard, Frank Haith has left Missouri. Frank Haith was the coach Missouri settled on a couple years ago after they weren't able to get Matt Painter. He's taking the Tulsa job, obviously trying to stay 1 year ahead of the guillotine because he is in trouble in Missouri. The fan base there never really embraced him. The NCAA stuff that followed him there didn't help.
Yeah.
So he's leaving for Tulsa, where he's getting a lot more money than you would ever think Tulsa would be paying a coach. The obvious immediate assumption was Missouri would come back after Matt Painter. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen from here on out. Ordinarily, when people who cover a certain school speculate as to who they're going to go after, they're right in some capacity. Part of that is you're throwing so many damn names out there anyway that you're bound to hit on one of them, but there just hasn't been a lot of talk from the Missouri angle about Missouri coming back after Matt Painter. Whether Matt Painter would be interested this time around, I have no idea. I really don't think so. I think obviously his situation is different now at Purdue. He got a lot of things from Purdue the last time. I don't think that was the shakedown some people think it was, but some things were improved. Assistant coaches, salaries improved. He obviously got a new contract. He's got better facilities. He seems to have more of a commitment from the athletic department's part to the success of the basketball program, as was announced at that gigantic press conference in Mackey Arena. So I don't think he would be too eager to leave. I know some people think his situation at Purdue might be tenuous. I do not believe it is, as much as people on the internet might think. The other part of it, too, is would Missouri come back after him? Obviously, the results have changed. When Missouri last went after him, he was coming off 5 straight NCAA tournament appearances. Obviously, was one of the hottest coaches in the country. Now, obviously, Purdue struggled the last 2 years. He has a $1 million buyout in his contract, which would be a deterrent for anybody to come after him, obviously. So I think yesterday's brief little bit of hysteria on the internet about whether or not Missouri would come back after Matt Painter has probably already been put to rest, but I certainly would not completely dismiss it quite yet.
Okay, that's the definitive
filibuster.
Definitive non-dismissal. And Kyle, you've had a busy morning. Obviously, Daryl Hazel, an interview with him at 11 o'clock, and I couldn't think of any creative segue from Matt Painter to Daryl Hazel, so I'll throw it to you, though. What did you hear from the coach?
Lots of things. I suppose if you want the newsy type stuff, they feel like Gabe Holmes is going to be back with the team this fall. I don't think that's necessarily breaking. I think they have felt that way. Of course, he's been away to take care of some academics. David Hedelin, Daryl sort of insinuated that suspension, that the incoming left tackle has at least been reduced to 3 games and possibly could be reduced even more, which would be good news for a team that pretty obviously needs a left tackle in 2014. Corey Clements, the other junior college player, is not going to play tackle. He's going to start out as a right guard at Purdue. I think that's telling in a couple of ways, that maybe they don't feel like a 380-pound tackle can really play tackle. And also I think a little bit telling that they don't feel quite as comfortable maybe as what we thought with Jordan Roos or Cameron Sermon playing at right guard and maybe want a little bit of an upgrade there. He talked a lot about, just personnel that he liked from the spring, like Danny Anthrop, like Danny Etling, and the fact that he didn't turn the ball over not once, 0 times in 15 practices during the spring. Etling did not have a turnover, which is impressive. He did not want to name a starting quarterback. We knew that after the spring. Still doesn't want to do it now.
You asked him again.
Ask him again,
Okay.
and we'll continue probably asking. He did say that probably the timeline will be moved up for doing so from last year, when I think they did essentially almost exactly 2 weeks, I think, before the opener against Cincinnati and named Rod Henry. It sounds like it'll probably be like a week into training camp that they would go ahead and do it, but he wants to continue to spur competition between those guys over the summer. So if not naming one does increase the competition, we'll see. But, I think it's pretty evident that one guy's ahead of the others at this point. And they're going to spread it out. I mean, this isn't really news, I don't think. We've sort of talked about it. But they're going to play 11 personnel, which is 3 receivers, a tight end, and a running back, which is a pretty huge change from what we saw at least early on last year when there were a lot of 2-back. He said you won't see a whole lot of 2-back. It'll be a spread offense. They'll throw it around, but he was adamant in saying that spread does not equal soft. You can still go out there and play some power football and be physical with guys even out of the spread. So he's pretty adamant about that. But yeah, it was a good conversation, 40 minutes, and got a lot of good stuff. And we'll have a bunch of it, some of it on the site, and then a bunch of it in the glossy, which we're working on,
Right, next
as
week.
you know.
Yes, I do know that. And I think that I also have a chance to ask Kevin Sherman when he comes in segment 2 about. We'll see if he wants to name a starting quarterback from that standpoint. I don't think he's going to. Brian, your impressions last week, obviously not doing football all the time, but certainly coming in and watching a fair amount of practice. But what did you see out of spring practice and your great wizard analysis of what is going on? Wizard-like analysis of that.
Am I wearing a cape?
Yeah, one of those
robe?
hats.
I don't know if I can add anything. Kyle and Stacy obviously haven't touched on already. I obviously, it all starts at the line of scrimmage, and it's going to be interesting on both sides of the ball, because on offense, obviously the offensive line is a huge question mark. You have a more experienced quarterback now. If Danny Etling is the starter, which my working assumption is he will be, you have more experienced wide receivers, which is to say you have experienced wide receivers. You can possibly have a very solid core of tight ends. It's interesting if they're going to spread people out.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how they're going to use all these tight ends now, because they moved Delapo McCarthy to tight end. If he's back from his injury in time to play in the fall, and you have Gabe Holmes back,
And
Justin Sins is a pretty solid player.
Yeah.
So that's 3 pretty solid tight ends you have right there. That if you're in single tight end all the time, you got to find snaps for. So it seems like you have a lot of solid pieces on offense, but you just have to be able to block. And I think that's the big question mark. I thought it was interesting with you mentioned Corey Clemens playing guard. That speaks to what J.J. Prince did this spring. In that he must have.
Yeah, and Darrell Hazel's quote's pretty good, and I'd have to search through here to find it, but something to the effect of, it doesn't always look very pretty, but he's been effective, which I think is the important part of that with J.J. Prince. And if Corey Clemens is playing inside, then that is a sign. And we asked, if the left tackle question, in my opinion, is so big that you can't just say that there's going to be one guy coming in and solve it. He said, there is some other things we could do. We can block with a tight end out there. We can chip with a running back to give some help. So I think they are certainly aware of the issue at left tackle. And you mentioned the tight ends where you put them in their 3 wide receiver. They're counting Delapo, for instance, as a split, third wide receiver on the inside. So the 2 tight end that we saw last year, it doesn't seem like we'll see a whole lot of this year. But they might use that second tight end, and even Gabe can do that, I think, some too, is stand up and split out there a little bit.
So you could play Sins and then.
So you could play Sins and Holmes together, or Sins and Delapo together, and be able to do that sort of spread offense that they want. And Akeem Hunt mixes in there too as a receiver, because they like him, split out a little bit as a slot guy as much as running the ball. Because Hazel said that if we were playing tomorrow, Raheem Mostert would be the #1 running back. You would think that nothing would change with that during the fall. You never know, I suppose, but that's the way they would line up and play it right now.
As I started with, we've talked a lot about the offensive line, but I think more significantly it's just the line of scrimmage in general, because Purdue was so porous against the run last year on defense, and now it gets younger before it gets older on the defensive line. And if some of those freshman linebackers come in and play, it gets a little bit younger in its entire front seven. So how Purdue's going to stack up against the run is obviously going to be a huge question too. I don't know if we necessarily saw in the spring what we're going to see in the fall, because there's some newcomers coming in who might impact things. But you're looking at a defensive line that's going to have a lot of true sophomores playing a lot of snaps this year. So how they stack up from a physical perspective is going to be a pretty big key to their success.
They really like Rajon Howard. I mean, Rajon.
They changed.
Not
He
Ray.
said Rajon.
He said Ray? I thought he said Ra.
Howard. Number 90.
They really like the guy in the middle.
Go with the number.
93.
I'd say can be hugely disruptive, and just can be a really good player. Now he probably needs to be a little bit better conditioned, but they like him even though he's pretty young.
Physical force.
Yeah. Are you sure you're right on that?
I'll tell you later.
Okay. I know that was a debate in the office on the pronunciation of his name. And how this show works, and your silences today, we do have, you can certainly send us your questions, and we'll ask them on the air. We have Kevin Sherman joining us also in segment 2. And then, of course, Chris Pelliadot will be talking Purdue football ticket marketing, and then Chris Clopton will be talking about John Purdue Club and the Golden Peach. So get your questions ready if you so desire. Brian, other things going on this week. Obviously, this week you were down in Indianapolis for P.J. Thompson's signing, and a little something happened right before that with A.J. Hammond's decision to make that public that he was staying at Purdue. Let's first talk about the Thompson commitment and signing, and anything new and different there from that standpoint.
No, he signed.
Yeah, and nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. No.
Yeah. Now, how do you think you've seen him play, and a guy that obviously point guard has been a much discussed situation at Purdue after Ronnie Johnson's departure, but where do you think he fits in early on at Purdue? Is it too early to tell?
I think the first thing Purdue fans are going to like, and Purdue's coaches are definitely going to like, is him as a person. He's got a great personality, very, very charismatic, very, very positive. Just sort of for an 18-year-old kid, he acts like the adult in the room. That's the way I've always described him for years now.
Yeah.
He's just got all those intangible qualities you want in a point guard. He's small, yes, but he's tough, and he's got that sort of it factor as a leader and as a personality. As a player, I think he's shown an ability over the years to do whatever his team needs him to do. I think he'll be tough. He'll be smart. He'll do what you ask him to do. He can make a jump shot. He will give the ball up. He will be unselfish. And all that stuff sounds very simple. But all that stuff that's very simple are the things that have held Purdue back the last 2 seasons. So I think when you look at the big picture of Purdue's season and kind of moving forward, it's kind of about getting back to basics now, about being unselfish, about having that team that shares the ball, that tries hard, that plays hard, that listens. And I think personalities like P.J. Thompson's will go a long way toward those ends.
A.J. Hammond's too, that situation, did it surprise you at the end of the day when he makes his decision to stay at Purdue? And much has been made about his draft stock and his discussions with Matt Painter, but in the final evaluation, surprise?
Did it surprise me? No, because you have to understand with these things, these are business decisions. This wasn't him coming back because of Purdue, because of him wanting to be a part of something at Purdue. All that stuff is, of secondary consideration. These are straight up business decisions. If you are a first-round draft pick, it doesn't matter how unbelievably great your situation is. It doesn't matter how much you want to get your degree. You can always do that later. But if you are a first-round pick and you are guaranteed X amount of dollars, and you can get into the league now and get to your second contract faster, because in the NBA, the second contract is where you make all your money. If you are guaranteed a certain level of draft stock, you go. I mean, you go. It's almost, you can't even debate it. Go, which is, he looked at a couple guys from Michigan last year who came back, and it really surprises you sometimes, because if you look at it from a business perspective, it is really hard to justify coming back when you're guaranteed a certain level of draft stock. A.J. Hammond does not have that guarantee. is self-aware enough to know that he could have been a second-round pick this year, and that could have been a ticket punch to Europe. And once you're over there, it's hard to get back unless you have a guarantee you're coming back. So I think he really made the move that was best for him. He can really improve his stock with this year to come. But it's up to him now. You know, he has to get a lot better than he is. Right now, he is a draft prospect. He's a great prospect more than he's a great player. And I think the NBA is really going to want to see him in the next year go from prospect to player. I think he's got a lot to prove at the college level. I think Purdue needs him. Obviously, I think him coming back gives Purdue a chance more than anything. This isn't Glenn Robinson coming back to school, or him coming back makes Purdue, you know, a top 25 team. This is one of the best players off a last place team coming back. What it does is if he gets better, Purdue has a chance in every single game it plays next year because of what he can be capable of. But it's all up to him now. He has to get a lot better, and if he does, that will be huge for Purdue, but it'll be even bigger for A.J. Henn.
Billy's asked a couple good questions here that that I think they're very good questions, Billy. We're going to ask one of them. One of them is, why was PJ still available? You know, why did he seem to get looks from bigger schools? I mean, is that just a function of how his high school career and AAU career went? Give us what you think about that as my iPad drops.
Well, every school looks for something different, you know, and X number of schools, when you're a 5'9" point guard, are just automatically going to cut you off their board. Two, he had to wait for his test score too, so that there might have been some questions there too. When you go into the spring, everybody fills up in the fall, so obviously a lot of teams aren't looking for point guards anymore. At the time he decided he was going to remain available. I think part of him waiting was he wanted to hold out for somebody like Purdue, or he wanted to hold out specifically for Purdue. I don't think maybe he was on as many schools' radar as a lot of kids. You get exposure in AAU, and the big tournaments he played in AAU, he played alongside Jaquan Lyle, Trayvon Blewett, Trey Lyles, and James Blackman. So there's not a whole lot of shots there.
Yeah.
What he did was he showed a guy who's got to score 20 points a game for his high school, showed in AAU he could be kind of that glue guy, and that a lot of his value lies in that. But when you do that in July with all these college basketball coaches watching you, they're not paying attention to you because you're not shooting the ball, you're not standing out as much. I think he's a big substance guy more than anything, and I think Purdue recruited him for substance more than they recruited him for anything that would make a kid a big-time recruit.
And we had also one other question from Andrew about Ryan Klein. Do you expect him, there's been a lot of talk about him. This is another one of those Swami type questions. Do you expect him to commit this week? And has he in fact been offered?
Maybe if you ask me in 42 minutes, I'll have a better answer for that. Yeah. But he's supposed to leave here in 42 minutes. I have no reason to believe he's been offered yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if Purdue did offer him. I don't think he would commit right away, but I wouldn't dismiss it either.
He didn't call you this morning and tell you what he was doing for the whole day.
No.
Kyle, women's basketball too. Talked to Sharon Versett this week, and this is a program. It's interesting in some ways, just seeing them all in person last week at the Cancer Challenge. A lot of walking wounded.
Yeah.
Really, it surprised me a little bit with Hayden Hamby on down to Whitney Bays, and yet this is a team that keeps focusing on obviously a very good season this year, but trying to do what it's going to take to get to the next level, get to the Sweet 16. What did you take from Sharon Versett this week?
Well, they do have a lot of injured players. Only 4 healthy right now, so they're going through individual workouts very individually.
Yeah, right.
Because unfortunately, Whitney Bays did suffer a stress fracture in her foot in the very last game of the season against Oklahoma State, which is too bad for her because she has had so many injuries in the past with her knee, and this was really going to be her first full off season to be healthy, and that's not going to be the case. But yeah, I mean, you look at them as a program, and it still is about getting to the second weekend, at least, of the NCAA tournament. And, Sharon talked more about that again on Tuesday, whatever day that was this week. And it said we got to get a blue-chip type player that can take us, I think the phrase she used was to the promised land. And, look back at Katie Gerald's, who got them there in 2007, or Lindsay Wisdom Hilton in 2009, and they just have not been able to either recruit or develop that caliber of player here in recent years. And Whitney Bays is a player who can be like that. she needs to stay healthy, and Sharon says she probably needs to have the ball in her hands more than she even did last year, and maybe that's trying to develop some guard-like skills, which, again, makes it sort of unfortunate that she is injured. But they need to develop that kind of player, recruit that kind of player, and that's who can get them back to the Sweet 16 and beyond, and they just haven't had it lately.
We have run the gamut of questions here, all over the map here in the first 20 minutes. We're gonna become more focused like a laser beam, as they say, with Coach Kevin Sherman joining Kyle Charters and myself, and that's a lot of pressure on the coach over there, but he'll be ready to go. So we're gonna take a 2-minute break, come back for the second segment, say goodbye to Brian Newbert for the final time this year. I know it's a good thing, but we'll look forward to seeing you back in August. Segment 2, Gold and Black Live, a couple minutes from now. Stay tuned. We'll see you back here in a couple minutes.